All right, folks, it's Healthcare Unfiltered, and it's an AI episode. Okay, guys, don't panic. Don't panic. We have an expert in town, and he's a first timer on Healthcare Unfiltered. So I'm really very happy to welcome Dr. Jonathan Carlson on Healthcare Unfiltered podcast for the first time. And he promised me it may not be the last time, but we have to wait a little bit to see advances in AI, Jonathan, right? Before we have you back.
Oh, I think AI is already here, but it's good to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
And I was gonna say, like, if we're gonna wait for advances to bring you back, which means like that's tomorrow, because every day there's something new I'm hearing about AI. So I actually wanted to talk in general about just a bit about the history and where we're going, and just from somebody with your level of expertise. But before we do that, maybe just a bit of an intro and how did you evolve to become now at Microsoft, and what do you do at Microsoft?
Yeah, great. So my interest actually started way back in high school with studying viruses, and then I went to university to study biology and got deeply sidetracked by computer science. And some of this was, I think I got a little pushed off by biology from lab work, where you don't really want me in a lab. It's a bad outcome when I'm in a lab. And what I discovered was that with computers, you could start really trying to understand the massive amount of data. This was early 2000s, so there's lots of digitization of biological data, and so I got really intrigued by the idea of how can you use algorithms, how can you use statistics, how can you use machine learning at that time to start pulling out patterns within the digitized biology data to actually learn something about the theory that you can go back and test in a lab. And so that was sort of my genesis. My particular research area that I got really into was actually viral evolution. I studied a lot of HIV, and sort of the premise there was how do you model the evolution of a virus parameterized by things like immunogenetics, which of course is driving a lot of viral evolution. And if you do that, how can you learn about both how the virus operates, but also how the immune system operates? And in that experience, one of the things that I really learned was that computational biology at its core is about interdisciplinary work, right? So you work with clinicians, of course, work with immunologists, work with virologists, and the outcomes, the scientific discoveries was everything from new algorithms to new virology to new immunology and even some vaccines that are still in clinic because that's a very, very slow process, or still in clinical development. It's a slow process. That was my start, and then I moved to the mic. I did much of this actually at Microsoft, and that's a whole story we can talk about. But over time, we started it as sort of a basic research of under the premise of how can computers actually be useful in this space over time. To now, healthcare and life sciences is really a big focus area for Microsoft,
Yeah.
a commercial opportunity.
What do you do now? Like, what do you at Microsoft? What's the scope of what you do, and what's your day-to-day like?
Yeah, so I sit in Microsoft Research, which is, of course, a research arm of Microsoft, and I lead the health and life science team. So this has been an evolving team. I've been there for almost 20 years now, and it started as a disparate collection of researchers that were really computer scientists interested in the space. And we've really grown. We've recruited. We have clinicians on the team. We of course have computational biologists. We have physicists. And really right now the focus is at a high level, what's the future of AI for biomedicine?
Mm.
And as we see that, it really anchors in two areas. One is, can AI, are we actually at a point now where we can realize the dream of a learning hospital system that actually improves over time and contextualizes information to drive really precise care? And on the other side, are we actually at a point where AI can start driving the learning lab, where AI is actually driving experimental discovery in a really interesting way? So that's kind of how we frame the world. And then our work is really focused both on core methods development and sort of the horizontal layer, and then really driving applications to understand where is this useful right now,
Yeah.
or where will it be useful in 3, 5, 10 years.
I bet you a lot of people, like when they hear the word Microsoft, right? Healthcare does not is not the first thing that comes to mind. I mean, it's a tech company. It's an amazing company that has transformed the world over the past several decades. When is there a time when Microsoft said, you know what, we should start focusing on healthcare? Was that like 20 years ago there was this thought about healthcare, or is this something that just evolved over time that healthcare is an area where we should try to apply tech to?
It's an interesting question. And at some level, Microsoft is and always has been a platform company. And at that level, we've always had a very large healthcare business. But, roughly speaking, that was selling Windows and Office,
Right, exactly that.
eventually
Yeah.
cloud, right? So there's a question of what does it mean to actually specialize in the space? Should we specialize in that space? And in research, we've been interested in this for a long time, but ultimately that culminated in the acquisition of Nuance a few years ago. And Nuance, of course, is a big health tech company, particular focus in radiology and then in ambient clinical intelligence right now. But that I would say that's the clear marker where Microsoft said, okay, we're all in here.
Yeah.
We really want to understand how technology can really improve the process of medicine and ultimately the outcome of medicine.
So let me back up a little bit to many decades. I mean, as I was reading a lot about AI lately, and many people attribute the birth of AI to Alan Turing back in the day. Are you in that camp, or do you think like is that when the world of AI started?
No, this is maybe getting a little metaphysical or theoretical, but at some level, the question of what do we even mean by artificial intelligence?
Go
So yeah,
ahead. There you
I,
go. Tell
I,
me, tell
I,
me.
I think Alan Turing absolutely articulated that in a very interesting way. And then, the classic definition was the Turing test, which is can you talk to a machine and not realize you're talking to a machine? And I would say most people would say we've clearly crossed that threshold right now. But at the same time, we of course have evolved. What do we really mean by this? So I think really there's a more practical question, which is not can you trick a human into this idea that the machine is really human just through language. Really, what we want to mean by artificial intelligence is do we have machines that can actually make us more intelligent with what we're trying to do, right? So I'd say for a long time, what was really practical was machine learning, which meant finding patterns and finding patterns that were very useful. Maybe it's classifying that there's a cat in this picture or whatever. It's a great pattern to find. Or in DNA, we use this all the time to identify genes or to try to predict what a gene does. But what becomes much more interesting is when we start being able to integrate that information and actually generate essentially new information. That's what generative AI really is about. Is take a sentence and generate the next word, the next sentence. That's what gives us that conversation. And when you think about that from a broader biomedical context, you can start asking the question, well, what does it mean to actually generate proposed protein structures that actually have a particular function? What does it mean to actually generate DNA that actually can trigger a particular action? And so, uh, again, to me, it's less about is it human-like and more about how does this actually synthesize information and propose new outcomes, propose new things that we can do that really augment our ability to reason about the world.
One of the reasons, Jonathan, I was asking is that if we agree that okay, I mean Alan Turing back in the 50s or 40s or whenever was doing this thing, and Imitation Game, by the way, is one of my favorite movies. But it seems to me like just until recently, maybe 5 years ago, I hear about AI on a daily basis. Maybe over the past couple of years since ChatGPT came on board, just like every single day. So to my simple mind, it seems like there's a huge hiatus. That's what I'm struggling with. Like if we agree that in the 40s we thought the machine could trick a human, that it's a human, why was it until like, I don't know, 5 years ago, 2020 or 2019, I'm starting hearing about it. Now, remember, you probably lived that world, but for the average person walking on the street, I think it's just until now that we hear about AI every 5 minutes.
Yeah, well, some of us technology questions. So the question is what shifted in the technology that made this happen? I would point to four major pieces. One of which was just a Nobel Prize that was awarded recently, right? This is for deep learning. That goes back honestly to the 80s, right? The core math. And that's roughly speaking, how do you have a complicated mathematical model that can actually efficiently distill information? We can get into the details of that, but that's roughly what it is. But I think there's actually three really interesting things that happened in the last 7 to 10 years. The first is attention. And this is a mathematical construct that allows these machines to focus their attention in a really useful way. And the analogy I like to give is if you're a clinician and a patient walks in and starts presenting with their history, your brain is doing a couple of things. One is it's taking all the distilled information that you learned in your training, and then it's applying the context of that patient. But it's not everything, right? If the patient tells you about their dog or their kids, that's interesting as a human, but it's not interesting for the purpose of the diagnosis. And your brain's able to filter that out and basically put that aside. And so one of the core inventions the last decade or so was a new mathematical representation of how you get machines to attend to the important context. So that's number one. Number two is the context of a concept of self-supervision. So one of the fundamental problems of machine learning for the last 3, 4 decades has been that we're limited by having well-labeled training data. And basically what you're doing is you're asking the machine to say, if I give you a bunch of examples, and these are positive examples, these are negative examples, find the pattern. The problem is training data is really expensive. And so those data sets tend to be small. The models end up being really brittle and they just don't generalize very well. The really important breakthrough here was an idea of self-supervision. In the context of text, is very simple. It's just given a sentence, predict the next word, predict the next word in a paragraph or in a document. And what's interesting about that, if you think about that for just a second, is first of all, that means that I can use all text in the world to train. I'm not limited to something that a human has labeled. And second, what actually happens is if you have a machine that can predict the next word, if I give you half a Wikipedia article and ask you to predict the next half, the only way the model can do that is if it's actually already has an understanding of the world at some level and it has a deep understanding of the semantics of language. And so you're basically getting the model to automatically learn the underlying model of the language and everything that's baked within that. And that concept became super powerful and actually led to the third major breakthrough, which is the observation of scaling laws, and maybe better called the scaling hypothesis. And this is just a very simple idea that more is always better. More data is better, more parameters in the model is better, more compute's better. And right now that's an observation, but it's an important observation because that's what drives investment. And it gives investors the confidence that if they put more money into computers and into data, you actually get a more powerful model. And we keep seeing that borne out. And so those three things together, the attention, the self-supervision, and the scale, has led to what appears to be a maintained exponential curve in terms of the ability of these machines. So put all that together and say, okay, well, why did this all of a sudden explode into our conscious? Well, because when you have an exponential curve that's growing, it grows very slowly until all of a sudden it's growing really quickly. And all of a sudden it starts displaying capabilities that were not present even a few months ago.
I love that. This is really a great context of bring this. This wonderful putting these three categories. You mentioned the Nobel Prize winners, and you mentioned that they won the Nobel Prize for their work in the 80s with these mathematics. What is that? What we mean by deep learning, machine learning, which is I don't know. Can you simplify? Is there a difference between deep learning and machine learning?
I'd say deep learning is a type of machine learning. It's a particular representation, a particular way to have a model with thousands, millions, billions of parameters that can efficiently learn.
But
But at the end of the day,
machine learning, I'm
how do you
like
learn
teaching the
something?
machine, right? Machine learning, I'm teaching the machine
That's right.
to do the mathematical model.
Yeah. So the deep learning is an efficient way to learn parameters to actually represent some function. But I think the more interesting part of this then is the ability to not just teach a model to match particular labels that I've given it, but pre-train a model off all available data. And again, this is what really enabled ChatGPT, for example, to become relevant because OpenAI could train that, roughly speaking, on the internet.
Right.
Now you can imagine, okay, well, that's a very interesting concept. What if I train a model on all protein sequences? What if I train a model on all DNA sequences or pathology images or radiology images? And again, the idea is when you do that, you're getting the model to start automatically learning some of the underlying semantic structures, if you will, of these different types of
Yeah.
data. And then once you do that, now you can very quickly you still use labeled data, but you can use a very small amount of labeled data to very quickly get the model to understand, oh, here's what you mean by, you know, a T cell in a pathology image or whatever. And it can pick that up much more quickly because it already has learned sort of the basic idea of what a pathology image looks like and what the edges of a cell look like and what the nucleus of the cell looks like and so on and so forth.
So what are large language models? What are LLMs then
It's exactly what I just described, but for text. So the
for
large
text?
part is the number of parameters, and these things are measured in the billions, even tens or
Mhm.
hundreds of billions of parameters. And the fact that they're trained on text. And again, you can start roughly, you can imagine this as basically being the internet, but how you train it matters. Are you training it on garbage text? Or are you training it on textbooks, for example? You'll get a very different quality of model. But roughly speaking, you pre-train it on text. But again, that idea, large language models is what really exploded on the scene with ChatGPT.
Right.
Last year, this has really been pushing to other modalities. We call them large multimodal models. And so right now, if you look at just the GPT class of models, we start with text, and then GPT-4o adds in audio and imaging. So now you have a model that can natively understand an image, natively understand a discussion, and can respond with a discussion as well. But again, when you think about biomedicine, you want to really push this into how do you get a model to natively understand pathology image so you can actually help you interpret it, or natively understand a chest x-ray and help you actually identify what the findings are, or even reason across multiple x-ray images and so on.
Okay, so I like that. I think we have a you're very articulate in simplifying few concepts, but I think a lot of people may struggle with understanding who are listening to this show. I want to pivot trying to get your opinion into how do you see all of this applying to healthcare? Because look, there are so many aspects of healthcare. I mean, we can probably spend hours talking about all aspects. Most people who may not be spending every day like you are in AI, they think of the application of AI is exactly what you first mentioned, pathology and radiology. Show me an image of radiology, tell me is this suspicious for cancer or I should not worry about. Show me an image of pathology, maybe give me a diagnosis that a pathologist could miss. But the more I talk to experts like yourself, it seems like this is a small part, just like a tiny portion. So help us understand, I mean, maybe for folks who are listening, beyond the images, pathology, and radiology, because this is everybody thinks about this and they joke about pathologists having no jobs, radiologists having no jobs, but I'm certain there are way more applications than these with AI.
Yeah, 100%. And some of this is a time scale question, right? Like right now, there's already machine learning models that can do certain diagnostics with pathology. So that's already here, and we'll see those get better over time. I'd say the first applications that we're seeing that are really impactful right now are specifically with the language models in an area broadly called ambient clinical intelligence. So Microsoft, other companies have products in market right now that are already making a big impact. And the basic idea here is that if you actually have essentially a microphone that listens in on the patient-physician interaction, then can a model actually take that transcript and structure that whole conversation and put it into a structured clinical note? Can it actually go ahead and write the prescription that you need? Can it go ahead and write the follow-up instructions? And why do we care about that? Because we've all had the experience of going to a physician and having the physician talk to us with their back to us while they're entering into a keyword.
It's like you're having an automated scribe.
That's right. That's exactly right. And every physician that you talk to talks about, my own family members who are physicians talk about how much time they spend in pajama time at home at night trying to catch
Oh
up
yeah.
with them. So just that very basic thing is actually a very challenging computer problem. If you think about the wildly unstructured conversations we have between the physician and the patient, being able to structure that into a useful way, that's here right now. There's lots of physicians using that. There's lots of studies showing how useful that is. So that's number one. That's a short time frame. That's the here and now, and that will keep improving over time. More specialties will wrap into that. I think what's much more interesting is as we think about this concept of the learning health system, and this is where we start trying to pull together all the superpowers of AI, which is I'll bring this back to the context part of those three buckets I told you, the attention that allows you to think about context. You know, you know this better than me, but when we talk about the medical journey, it's an iterative process, right? Nobody walks into a clinic and we haven't and has everything measured right away, right? There's a discussion that happens. There's some tests that are ordered. Depending on the complexity, there's follow-up that happens. And all that follow-up is based off of what we're learning about that patient and comparing it to your training, what's already known in the system and sort of the medical society as a whole. And I think it's really interesting to think about AI is how do you get a system that can start pulling that context automatically and not just comparing it to what's already known, but the actual experiences of other patients,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? This is the whole concept of real world evidence right now, right?
Right.
So rather than trying to practice medicine based off averages, how do we actually say, look, this patient in front of me is actually like many other patients. And I can actually look at their information and see what their outcomes were and see what worked for those patients that were similar to them. And this is a place where for the first time, I think AI gives us the tools to actually be able to ask those questions. If you come back again to a time horizon question, what can we do with that? Well, right now we can even just go into the patient record and structure the text. Most medical notes are unstructured text. So right now we can go in and we can structure it. And now we can already start asking some of these questions. But over time, I think what we're really going to get to is AI being able to synthesize the information that's not just in the text, but in the pathology image, in the radiology image, in the DNA, to be able to use that to reason about this patient. Here's the next test that you should order. Here's the next treatment you should consider, and do that as a really as a companion, a, a, a co-pilot, if you will, with the physician themselves.
Hmm. You know, it's you reminded me with my informatics professor when I was in business school, and he he said like, I don't understand why you people can't cure diseases. I'm like, what do you mean? I mean, it's like, I mean, literally, like, it's like, well, just look at patterns. I mean, you have like, you've got 30 million people in the US with diabetes. Like, can't you look at patterns and predict them? And I mean, the questions, I never started thinking about it until he was asking these questions. And now I'm hearing it from you also. I mean, once you start having this data and you structure it, is really big. So if I'm hearing you correctly, there's one element of AI that might help kind of like my daily operations in a hospital or clinic, right? That's like the scribe, um, I don't know, chatbots. I mean, is that like within that as well? Like,
Yeah, or the imaging is an obvious place where that starts as well. But the thing you were just saying made me think of a really interesting example that might make this real.
yeah,
This paper we just published recently with Providence. It was a very, very simple question, right? A couple of years ago, a number of part of their practices shifted from doing a gene panel for, I think this was on a certain type of lung cancer, to full genome sequencing. And they wanted to ask the question, did that improve outcomes? Right?
mhm,
And when they did full genome sequencing, of course, they weren't trying to find anything new. They were just saying, if I do full genome sequencing and I go find the actual variation, can I go map it to a known uh, uh, drug that will target that? That's all published. Even asking that question was shockingly hard. Sure, all the EHR data was digitized, but all that information was in this unstructured text. And so
yeah,
how do you even go back and answer the question? Well, it turned out that you could use some of these generative AI techniques to go back, actually just structure it. And once you structured it, now it's a pretty simple statistical problem to ask. Did this really expensive procedure we do actually improve outcomes? And what they found was, yeah, the median survival doubled when you did that. And the reason why it doubled was that the rate at which people got precision treatments doubled, and so on and so forth. To me, that's such a beautiful example
hmm
where it
hmm
didn't lead to new treatments. It validated what intuitively we knew should be true, but really importantly, it gave us that validation. And if
yeah,
you think about that moving forward, how do you actually start discovering that? Because people are doing different things all the time. How do you actually use that variation to learn what's actually working so that you can update the standard of care?
yeah. Is there, I mean, as we think of, so we talked about the operational component, like what we just talked about, and then the larger picture of, patterns and all of these things. Um, from biomedicine standpoint, how can, where do you think AI fits in drug development? Is there, like, how do you apply that in new drugs for disease? Is it just deciding what are the best targets? Is it you pick one of like better three drugs? Like how does AI do that? Does it have a role?
No, it's a great question, and of course, it's a big field, but I like to massively oversimplify drug discovery into four big buckets. The first is you have to find the target. What the heck am I even trying to go after to solve, right? The second is you have to actually design or find the drug. Then you have to validate the drug. And then you have to actually deliver the drug. So those are our four big buckets. Of course, there's a zillion steps in each of those. The hardest one is going to be find the target. That's actually understanding causal biology and know that if I actually perturb this particular part of the pathway, I'll get the end result that I need in the human. I think ultimately that's going to be the holy grail where AI can help us synthesize and understand biology. But that's a really hard problem. I think we're a ways away from that, except for in very specialized cases. The second bucket of how do you actually design a drug? If you know, say, the exact protein structure you're trying to manipulate, you need to get a small molecule that fits within that. We already have models that do a pretty good job of that. Now, there's a number of startups that are working in the space. There's also Nobel Prizes won for being able to, this last year, for being able to actually predict the structure of proteins. There are drugs that are in up to phase 2 trials, I think, that were designed from scratch with AI. So they're not in clinic yet, but they're in humans right now and being validated. But I think this is a space that we're going to see inevitably in a very short amount of time, more and more drugs that are designed, at least with the help of AI, starting with the place, I know what I'm trying to target. I just need a thing that will target it. I think the next stage, how do you validate the drug? This gets us into how do you actually do clinical trials? And this is where I think AI has a huge role to play. Again, because the bottleneck here is how do I know which people, first of all, if I'm going to enroll a clinical trial, how do I find people that are actually going to get the disease? Because if I don't have people getting the disease, then I have no trial. And second, how do I figure out which people are most likely to benefit from the drug? And this is a spot where that simple ability that we were just talking about a minute ago for AI to be able to structure unstructured information becomes a key starting point for us to be able to just match patients to clinical trials. And then if you can match patients to clinical trials, how do you actually optimize the design of that clinical trial, and so on and so forth.
Hmm.
And then the last stage, of course, is what we're talking about again, of how do you get the drug to the right person? There's a clinical trial, but then even once the drug's in practice, how do you actually learn from the real world experience of patients, say, hey, these are the people that are actually benefiting from the
Yeah.
drugs. So I see AI as impacting all stages of that pipeline, uh, but at different time horizons.
I really love that. This is very nice segmentation of this. Can I just focus on the first one, just specifically,
Yeah.
just like identifying a target? Is it you? Because I mentioned that I say that because you said that's the most important piece. Um, it's not an easy thing. Like for
No.
example, I'm trying to understand how AI does this because let's throw a disease. Let's say Parkinson's disease, just an example of this. Like, how do I know which target in Parkinson's disease, like, or
No,
choose
that's
any
right. And I'm
disease?
saying I don't think AI is there yet.
Okay,
What it can do right now, and we see examples of this, is it can help you distill the literature, right? So you can ask a
right,
question, you say,
right.
hey, I can actually pull together different patterns. And you'll even see one of the, I think, really remarkable properties of the current generation of these frontier models is the ability to reason and even disagree with a human. So I've seen really interesting examples where you can pull up a paper, and I use this all the time. Just pull up Copilot and ask it, can you summarize this for me? Well, what do you think about this? Well, if you keep pushing it in some of these cases, you can get it to try and understand, both describe the conclusions of the paper, but also push it where there's gaps in the paper, or even push in terms of where you should have an experiment to actually validate a conclusion. And again, it's not, I wouldn't use it to actually drive my science, but as a scientist to help me sort of reason through, distill this paper, make other connections, ideate in terms of what might be possible if we accept this premise of this paper. That's where AI is right now. And that it's limited with where we want it to go. Where we really want it to go is that not only understand the text, but be able to directly model the cell itself, to directly model the proteins, to directly model how those things interact. But we're a ways away from that really
Yeah.
working.
You know what's so funny, and if it's funny or not funny, is I think I feel now AI is happening with me every minute of my day. I if I'm calling Apple service for like my iPhone is not working the other day, I get a robot telling me I'm like a human, just ask me anything. I mean, like, okay, that's AI. And look at translation, it's an AI. I look at my Instagram and I get like literally, I've been searching for a couple of things. Now my entire Instagram is the same exact thing I was searching for. That's AI. Is it just me noticing it all of a sudden? It's in every step of our lives,
Yeah,
or
and how often is that really frustrating to you that you get on that call and you try whatever you can to poke it so you get to a
oh, I
real.
keep clicking 000, nothing happens. I'm like, can I just get not a robot, please? I just want to. It's like, I didn't
Well, but
understand you.
it brings to a really interesting point, which is yes, it's everywhere. No, it's not everywhere useful, right?
Yeah,
And that
so that's
that's
actually a good point. So let's talk about pitfalls or shortcomings. I mean, I think I obviously in tech, there's always it's a double-edged sword. What should people be worried about with AI?
I mean, if we scope that broadly, a lot of things. If we scope it to biomedicine, though,
Yeah,
it I think it's an interesting. We're in a really interesting time period right now where on the upside, I can make a demo out of almost anything that's really exciting. And
yeah,
so what that does is it tells me we're on path to some really interesting applications. But the first pitfall is if my application only works 80% of the time,
Right.
what happens the other 20%, right? And there's a set of applications for which that's totally fine, right? If I'm summarizing a transcript and I'm doing it in such a way that I highlight for the physician, here's where I'm uncertain, whatever, like there's use cases where that works. If I'm asking the AI to make a life or death situation, that's not acceptable, right? So I think being really grounded in terms of how good is the AI for the tasks that we're asking it to do right now is critical. And that's actually a really hard thing to measure, right? We're not in a world where you have a binary yes, no. You're trying to actually, most of medicine is much fuzzier than that. So how do you actually measure how well the AI is doing? How do you measure how well a human's doing? If the AI is as good as a human but still fails 20% of the time, or is that acceptable? Or does it need to
Well,
be
I was going to say, I think we tend to have more, we tend to forgive more when humans make errors
absolutely?
than with AI, right? Um, Usually, my perfect example to this, I don't know if you agree. I mean, we know that there are car accidents, unfortunately, all the time, and we tend to say if somebody gets in a car accident, okay, well, it happens. Well, if you have an autonomous car and it gets a problem, and unfortunately there's a fatality, it's all over the news because our expectations of that tech is zero. And I don't think we can
You
get
know
there.
what AI is really good at is it can detect unsafe driving. And so this becomes a really interesting example in medicine too, where I wouldn't trust AI to make a life or death decision. Would I trust it to be a second opinion and say, hey, did you think about XYZ? You may have missed this. And it turns out that's actually an easier problem in a somewhat surprising sense. Uh, Validation is easier than generation. We've
It's
seen this.
also probably you could look at certain patterns of care of a particular physician or a surgeon, and possibly the AI would tell you, well, maybe, I mean, maybe that's not the best surgeon for you. I mean,
Or,
maybe.
or even give feedback to the surgeon about here's what I'm seeing, and here's a different way to approach this. So I think anchoring this in terms of what are the applications and right now, I think many of these applications are either very obviously safe applications, or they sit more on the side of sitting alongside a physician and
Yeah.
basically asking the question, hey, did you think of XYZ? I see you're going down this diagnostic path, but did you consider this? And I think that's where we might see some really interesting use cases in the near term that truly augment care as opposed to doing something that it's not really ready to do yet.
Do you see if you pontificate in the future, do you see payers? I mean, lots of the healthcare, obviously, services are, you know, paid by third party as opposed to out of pocket. And we're not going to go into the complexity of the healthcare system because that's like about 7 other hours. But there are certain services, like how would payers, you think, will react to some of the services that are done by, because it's costly. I mean, I mean, you can't, if let's say you're going to have an automatic scribe, at some point somebody is going to pay for it and the hospital has to purchase, and can they bill for, like, I don't know. I'm struggling in understanding how the payer system would work once you have certain things are automated. Do you,
I always laugh because I've had payers ask me, "Hey, we build a system that would automate the approval process?" And then I have providers ask me, "Hey, can you rebuild a system that would automate the approval process on the other direction?" At some point, are we just building a system that's gaming itself? Like that doesn't make any sense, right? Um,
yeah,
but I think there's a much more constructive way to think about it. And there's startups that are in this space right now, which is
yeah,
if you go back to context, what is the right next test or treatment order for this
right,
patient? That
right.
context for the patient is part biology, is part social determinants, and is part the environment that you're in. And that includes what are the actual facilities at the hospital. It includes what will actually be paid for. And I think that's actually a really interesting place that, like I said, startups are already exploring this right now of given this patient's insurance and everything that's known right now, if this is the diagnosis, be sure that you ask this question. Be sure you order this test before you go to the next step, because that's what's going to that's what we will need to verify that
Yeah.
that's the appropriate
Yeah.
treatment that we can pay for.
Well, I could talk to you for hours, and I know your schedule is extremely busy, so I'm going to be very nice. I'm not going to talk to you for hours, but I do have to ask you my last question, which is, what should I have asked you that I may have forgotten? Because I think we can go really many directions. I think we covered a lot of space, and it's a fascinating topic. But anything you think is pressing, I should have asked you that you want to leave our listeners with?
I think one of the pieces that we often forget in this system. I'll go back to my four buckets of find a target, develop a target, validate, and deliver the drug. There's a part that we miss in the system so often, which is we focus so much on healthcare, we focus so much on life sciences. And to me, one of the really interesting opportunities about AI is the ability to start connecting these together, right? So if we talk about a learning health system that actually drives better care, a side effect of that is you start identifying who are the patients that are not getting the right care. And part of that will be biology. And part of that leads back to, oh, hey, here's a target that's not working for these patients that leads us to a
Oh, I
new.
love that.
And so I think as long as we can keep thinking back as we start driving this convergence, we'll actually be able to get both these cycles, the healthcare delivery cycle and the biomedical discovery cycle spinning faster by getting them to work together.
I love that. Always easier to talk about the success. We should also analyze our failures. Dr. Jonathan Carlson, thank you so much for coming on Healthcare Unfiltered.
Thank you. Very much enjoyed it. Appreciate it.